I was 3 years old on the morning of September 11th, 2001. And it is a day that, even that young, I can still vividly remember watching the television and seeing what happened. No, I wasn't there in New York, and it's probably not one of the most interesting September 11th stories you'll ever hear. But it's my September 11th story, and it's what I remember of 9/11. So at 3 years old, I remember waking up one morning and everybody was in the living room watching something on television, and I just kind of showed up around the time that the second plane hit the South Tower of the World Trade Center.
But I'd say the hold is, let me just get a better look right now.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd say the hold takes about, looks like 6, 7 floors were taken out. And there's more explosions right now. Hold on, people are running. Hold on.
And I remember watching this just big fireball come out of the building when the plane hit it. And at 3, I didn't really understand what was going on. It never registered that this was a terrorist attack. I didn't know what a terrorist was. I just knew that we're looking at these skyscrapers that are on fire. And then I remember a while after that seeing the building collapse. And at that point, being young, it had been a long time sitting there. I think it was probably an hour between the plane hitting and the building falling. I don't remember the exact time between the two events off of the top of my head, but I remember sitting there for a long time. So I ended up going outside not too long after the attacks had started, and I lived next to a small, like, regional airport type thing. It was really not even that. It was a very small, like, Cessnas took off from there, tiny airport. And the landing strip was in my backyard, and planes would land every 5 to 10 minutes. And the sound is something you kind of ignore. It's something that you're so used to hearing when you live right beside an airport of any size, I'm sure. But this one, it was just something I was used to hearing. The planes would land every couple of minutes, and you'd see them come in for a landing. And today, it was weird because it was dead silent. There wasn't a plane in the sky, and there was nobody else outside besides me and my mom. Because somebody had to watch this 3-year-old kid playing in the front yard. And that's kind of my full recollection of the day and what was going on. I remember playing with Legos, not understanding what was going on, and I was building buildings and knocking them over and stuff. And then later on in life, probably 2, maybe 3 years after that, when I was about 5, 6, 7 years old maybe, is when it really hit me. It had been explained to me, but that's when it kind of was like, I get what happened here. This was not something that was just a joke or something that was going to be forgotten. It was something that had changed the course of America. And then I remember in 2012, for the very first time, I got on a plane. And the events of 9/11 came rushing back. The moment I got to the airport, I was absolutely terrified. The only reason I got on that plane was because my grandmother was in the hospital, and she lived in Indiana, which is where I lived at the time of 9/11. So I got on the plane, and it was like 8 o'clock at night, and I was just certain that we were going to be flown into a building. Because I remember being so young when 9/11 happened, but it had like scarred me and made me absolutely terrified to fly for the longest time. I have gotten more comfortable with the experience of flying, but it's definitely something that has taken some time to get used to, being in the air and going to the airport again. The other experience that really was just mind-blowing was arriving in New York and seeing the site of the September 11th attacks, seeing the museum, seeing the big pit in the ground where the buildings used to be and the waterfalls and everything. It was absolutely one of the craziest sights I have ever laid my eyes on, because you're standing there where 3,000 people died, looking at this thing that I remember as a small child watching on television, and it's right there in front of you. It's like the living proof that this happened, and you're just kind of looking into this empty space, and it was just one of the craziest moments I've ever seen. So that's kind of my 9/11 story. I'm sure a lot of you out there have potentially more interesting stories than I do. One of my teachers in high school had a absolutely insane story. She lived in New York at the time of the September 11th attacks, and she was walking into the South Tower when the plane hit the building. She was walking through the door, and the plane hit the building, and somebody else grabbed her and told her not to go in there and just pointed up and said, look, this building's on fire, somebody just flew a plane into it, and it saved her life, I'm sure, because it was just insane. I've never heard a story like that from somebody I knew. If you have an interesting September the 11th story that you'd like to share, leave it down in the comments below. How old were you when 9/11 happened? What do you remember? How has America changed for you since 9/11? I'd love to hear all that from you. So anyway, I will see you tomorrow with a different video. So peace out.